That's right, and a whole bunch of other rights. You are listening to Your Rights at Work. Chris Scarlett here with Ed Smith, and this is WPFW's call-in show about your rights on the job, the ones you have, the ones you don't have, the ones you wish you had. Our next guest he's a legendary organizer. He's got a brand new book out, Fighting Union Busters in a Carolina Carpet Mill. We've got him live from North Carolina, and that's Phil Cohen. Phil, thanks so much for taking time to join us.
Hey, great to be back here again.
So, Fighting Union Busters in a Carolina Carpet Mill. Great title, great fight. Why don't you give us some quick background on this little joint called Mohawk Industries in the perfectly named Eden, North Carolina?
Yes, that's right. Rick, the book is, in one sense, an insider's look at what union busting has evolved into under the Trump administration. In late 2017, Workers United SEIU asked me to come out of retirement to investigate and expose an illegal decertification effort by Mohawk Industries at its Eden, North Carolina carpet mills. Mohawk is a Fortune 500 company with a global presence. And I've been successfully fighting decerts for 30 years. You know, one of the things I'm proudest of in my career is that no union local's ever been decertified in my watch. But I encountered things in the field in Eden unlike anything that I ever had while fighting professional union busters. You know, normally an NLRB, you know, when you file NLRB charges and you're documenting management support and involvement, it is adjudicated thoroughly on a regional level of the NLRB, which is set up like most federal law enforcement agencies. We have regional offices, reporting to a national office, and it doesn't really go before the 5-member panel that governs the NLRB until, all efforts have been exhausted at a regional level and one party is still protesting the outcome. A month into this case, the union-busting attorney retained by Mohawk was appealing directly to the Trump-appointed heads of the NLRB, not disputing the merits of our evidence, which were overwhelming, but asking that the evidence get thrown out based on obscure legal technicalities. Very similar tactics to what John Gotti's lawyer did to keep him out of jail for many, many years. It doesn't matter. The evidence that he killed somebody doesn't matter because we have this legal technicality here saying the evidence shouldn't be admitted.
So Phil, who are you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes? Don't ignore the dead body in the corner.
There you go, exactly. And also, with 2 months after the campaign started, the National Right to Work Committee attorneys, 3 of them, entered an appearance. And they were trying to use our case as a test case to have the NLRB revoke laws implemented by FDR in 1935 to protect workers' rights from illegal decertifications, and tried to use our situation as a test case to have all those laws repealed by the Trump NLRB.
So this is really mind-boggling, and I was really happy when this came across my desk, and because I think a lot of folks sort of, this is kind of under the radar kind of stuff. It doesn't necessarily make headlines, and I had not heard about this case, to be honest. And I follow this stuff pretty carefully. And my co-host Ed Smith has been around for a minute, and I don't think you knew about this. Did you, Ed?
Wasn't aware of the specific case, but the trend is clear. And my concern is it's not just going to be the Trump administration; it's going to be any subsequent Republican administration, and these guys that are in there are going to be in there for a little bit longer. Even under a Biden administration, their terms will not expire until probably halfway through his administration. So the NLRB is no longer our friend.
Yeah, look, that's right. And, the interesting thing about the Trump NLRB, I've dealt with the NLRB under every administration since George Bush Sr. up to the present. And, the NLRB was developed under Roosevelt's administration to be a neutral body to adjudicate allegations of unfair labor practices by either employers or unions. And naturally, if you had a Republican administration, they were biased a little bit to the right, Democrat biased a bit to the left. But I've never seen anything like this, where essentially the law, they're essentially in place not to make decisions based upon the law, but to repeal one law after another. And, Trump has done similar things with other federal agencies like the EPA, like Social Security. He's essentially dismantling the New Deal one piece at a time through the various agencies that administer aspects of those rights of the American people, by having them to simply pull the legal teeth from those agencies to repeal the laws those agencies are supposed to administer to protect the rights and interests of the American people. So this is unlike anything I've encountered in 30 years of running special projects for the union.
Well, I got to ask the question, Phil. I mean, and this is not a new question. You've heard it before, Ed. I'm sure you've heard it before. I mean, is the NLRB, for all intents and purposes, I'm not even going to say a paper tiger. I mean, should we just board up the doors and move on? I'm serious. I mean, what's the point?
Look, an image came into my head earlier today. Assuming Biden wins and he makes a clean sweep of Congress, and we suddenly have a Democratic-controlled government again. It's kind of like we've been in an earthquake, and when the earthquake stops, life doesn't go back to normal. The human casualties, the property damages is all around you, and it takes a long time to clean things up. And what's going to follow in the wake of the Trump administration? As you said, we're still going to have a Trump-dominated NLRB for about 18 months. We have all these various federal judges who would be in a position to uphold or reject challenges made to NLRB decisions appointed by Republicans who will be in place for a number of years. But I think over time, if we regain control of the government, things will level out. And especially, what we really somehow need to lobby to do and get the message across is that Biden is serious about being the most pro-union president in American history, that we need to get his NLRB to simply reinstate the various laws that were unethically and illegally repealed by the Trump NLRB.
Yeah,
his mandate is not to indicate labor disputes, but to be part of Trump's war of genocide against the labor movement.
Those are great points because as a practicing attorney representing nurses, I've generally stayed away from ULPs during the last 4 years because I do not want to be filing a ULP that normally would result in a complaint against the company. But in these times, we're also worried about precedent setting, and this board has been very clear that it's willing to just throw out 30, 40 years of precedent, kind of similar to what we're seeing or potentially seeing in the Supreme Court.
I'm just thinking that.
And the Supreme Court will have reverberations for longer than ours because they have lifetime appointments. But the points you make are just so excellent. And we hopefully when Biden does win, we have to keep the pressure on. And as Chris, you said, the day after, we need to make sure labor reminds Joe that he's a working man's friend, and that part of that is the NLRB.
And one thing I will share with your listeners, not to give away the end of the book, but we kicked Mohawk's butt.
Spoiler alert!
Part of this book, within the context of simply, an action-packed, good storytelling drama, because that's how I write, it encompasses the tactics, legal and organizing tactics, that allowed us to beat the odds and put a Fortune 500 company in its place. And the real story contained within the book is how we did that. Now, this was a classic David and Goliath battle. I got called in 2 days after the DCER petition had been filed. I mean, I was called in at like the 11th hour and 59 minutes. But we were able to turn the tables, and the how we did it is the real story within the book.
Well, I tell you, if folks are going to want to get this, it's called Fighting Union Busters in a Carolina Carpet Mill. As folks probably know, we put out a podcast version of this show, and you can just find it at Your Rights at Work. And we'll put a link in where you can pick up this book. It's from a publisher called McFarland. It's literally just out in September of this year. Phil,
let me share this with your listeners. The best place to go, and the link that I hope you share, is my website.
Right.
FightingUnionBusters.org.
There you go.
Realizing that a lot of working people especially are struggling financially now, I'm passing on my 40% author's discount on books directly to the public with no markup. If they get it at FightingUnionBusters.org, and I hope that's the link you use, they'll get the book at 40% off list, plus a copy of my last CD, while supplies of that last. And there's also links on the website to all the major retailers if people prefer to go there.
That's fabulous. FightingUnionBusters.org. I love it. That's an easy to remember link. Phil, before we let you go, just this is a Rights at Work show. People call in with questions about, rights on the job. So, what are a couple of key tips for you, from you, for folks who may be facing, union busting efforts or intimidation on the job? What do you advise folks?
There's a lot of swords that cut both ways. One of the mistakes that Mohawk made is they were overconfident and they overplayed their hand. I mean, the best thing that can happen to you going into a fight, whether it's a street fight or a fight with a company, is to be underestimated by your opponent. So look for ways that the employer just thinks they can get away with anything, but they can't. But it's all about documentation. You have to prove that the employer was allowing anti-union employees to roam the plant during working hours, getting signatures on a petition. You have to be able to prove that management was involved in the solicitation. And a fascinating thing about the NLRB, no matter who's running it, that I mentioned in the book, you can send someone to death row based on circumstantial evidence, but you cannot get an NLRB complaint based on circumstantial evidence. You have to have hard proof. You have to have one witness after another, corroborative witnesses, cumulative witnesses who saw the same thing. You really have to get in there and dig and investigate and overcome the fear of the average worker to come forward and give a sworn affidavit to a federal agency. And the other thing that's our tiny ray of light is that even though the heads of the NLRB were appointed by Trump for all the wrong reasons, the field staff and field attorneys are exactly the same people. And you get to know them, and the majority of them really understand what's going on.